Gabby, I swear if this is another nugget situation, I'm calling the universe for a refund. Adrian Palmer balanced his 4-year-old daughter on his hip while juggling a brown takeout bag in his other hand, trying not to drop it on the walk back to their tiny apartment. Rain started to mist over the sidewalk, and of course, his umbrella was still in the trunk of his beat-up sedan. Typical. He'd promised Gabby chicken lo mein, but with the way his day was going, it'd probably be tofu. Dad, Gabby giggled, tugging at his hoodie string. You said nuggets yesterday, today's noodles. He kissed her forehead. Let's hope. At the apartment complex, he nodded at old Mrs. Patel, who was dragging her poodle up the stairs. Their place wasn't fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1 leaky faucet, and a heater that made more noise than warmth, but it was theirs. He set Gabby down, opened the bag, and frowned. Sushi. Inside were 3 neatly packed boxes of high-end sushi, wasabi in tiny porcelain containers, and a printed receipt with the name Leela Fairway on it. He blinked. Sushi, I didn't. Before he could finish the thought, there was a knock on the door. When he opened it, she was standing there, umbrella in one hand, phone in the other, looking like she'd stepped out of a movie set. Her coat was cream-colored, perfectly belted around her waist, and her heels didn't even have a scuff. She had a face you didn't forget: sharp jaw, soft eyes, and a kind of presence that made you straighten up without knowing why. Hi, she said, her voice warm but slightly amused. I think we got each other's orders. Adrian blinked. You're Leela. She smiled. And you're not someone who eats sea urchin rolls voluntarily, I'm guessing. He laughed. Not unless I'm being blackmailed. Leela held up a different takeout bag. Chicken lo mein. Praise be, he muttered, handing her the sushi. You just saved a 4-year-old meltdown. From behind him, Gabby popped her head out. Hi, are you the noodle fairy? Leela's face lit up. Hi, noodle princess. I think I might be. Adrian chuckled. Gabby manners. Thank you, fairy lady, Gabby said, waving. Leela crouched to Gabby's level. You're very welcome, and you've got excellent taste in dinner. Wanna eat with us? Gabby asked. Oh, Leela looked up at Adrian, who looked just as surprised. I mean, if you're not busy. Adrian shrugged, scratching the back of his neck. We've got plastic forks and cartoons. Leela hesitated. Her driver was probably waiting downstairs. Her penthouse was 10 minutes away in Tribeca, and she had back-to-back meetings tomorrow. But something about the way Gabby grinned and the way Adrian looked quietly exhausted with the kind of tired that spoke of real responsibility made her nod. I'd love to. Inside, Gabby immediately took charge, dragging Leela to the couch and explaining the entire plot of the cartoon on the screen. Adrian set the food on the coffee table and tried not to stare at the woman now sitting cross-legged on his faded couch, laughing with his daughter like she belonged there. So, Leela said, picking up a fork, what do you do when you're not mixing up takeout? I work construction, Adrian answered. Freelance when I can get it. Otherwise, take care of Gabby. Her mom isn't in the picture. Leela's expression softened. That's a lot. It is, but she's worth every second. Leela looked over at Gabby, who was now pretending her noodle was a lasso. I can see that. He glanced at her. What about you? What do you do? Leela gave a small smile. I'm in finance, sort of. Sort of. Let's just say I sit in a lot of meetings, and people pretend I'm not the one signing their checks. He laughed. Sounds fake. Sometimes it feels fake. They talked for a while, about cartoons, school lunches, Gabby's obsession with dinosaurs. Leela stayed longer than she meant to. When she finally stood up, Adrian walked her to the door. Thanks for dinner, she said. You brought it. Still. He opened the door. You're welcome anytime. Leela looked up at him, her voice quieter. I might take you up on that. As she walked away, Adrian stared after her, heart pounding for reasons he couldn't explain. She was out of his league, he knew that. But she'd sat on his couch, laughed with his daughter, and didn't flinch away when he said he was a single dad who worked with his hands and barely made rent. He shut the door, trying not to think too hard about the way she'd looked at him just before she left. Back in her car, Leela stared out the window. Back to the penthouse, Miss Fairway, her driver asked. She nodded slowly. Yeah, back home. But all she could think about was the tiny apartment, the man with kind eyes and calloused hands, and the little girl who called her the Noodle Fairy. And for the first time in a long time, Leela Fairway, billionaire, CEO, woman who ran empires, felt like she just met someone who saw her as more than a last name and a bank account. And she wasn't ready to let that go. Adrian stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of his best button down, the only one without paint on the cuffs. He'd never worn it on a weekday before, let alone at this hour. Gabby sat on the edge of the bed, swinging her legs in rhythm with the cartoon theme song playing faintly from her tablet. You look like the dads in those movies, she said between bites of cereal. He turned, one eyebrow raised. What kind of movies? The mushy ones where they go on dates and kiss and stuff. She wrinkled her nose. You. Adrian laughed under his breath and ran a hand through his hair. I'm going to a meeting. It's not a date. Is it with Noodle Fairy? He paused. No, it's a job thing. That wasn't entirely a lie. The card Leela had left at his door the next morning, gold embossed with only her name, and a number led to a short, clipped phone call with someone named Monica, who spoke like a personal assistant and arranged a coffee meeting with a company Adrian had never heard of but apparently wanted to discuss his experience in residential restoration. He didn't know what any of that meant, but the interview was in a part of the city where the buildings didn't have chipped paint or flickering hallway lights. So he borrowed his cousin's car and dropped Gabby at daycare early, promising to pick her up with a juice box and a story. Now he stood outside the lobby of a glass tower that stretched into the sky like it owned the clouds. Inside, polished marble floors gleamed beneath his boots, and a receptionist with a headset greeted him by name before escorting him to an elevator. The office on the top floor didn't look like a place that hired guys like him. There were no blueprints, no exposed wires, no smell of drywall. Just floor-to-ceiling windows, curated sculptures, and silence that pressed in around him like velvet. He waited in a sleek leather chair until a woman in a slate-colored pantsuit stepped out of a glass-paneled room. "Mr. Palmer," she asked. He stood. "That's me. I'm Monica. Miss Fairway will be with you shortly." He froze. "Miss Fairway." Before Monica could explain, Leela appeared at the end of the corridor, her heels tapping softly against the floor. She wore a navy dress that looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine, but her expression was open, almost apologetic. "Thanks, Monica. I'll take it from here," she said, stopping in front of Adrian. "You?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Leela gestured toward her office. "Come in." He followed her inside, trying not to look as out of place as he felt. She closed the door behind him and motioned to the chair across from her desk. "I should have told you," she began, settling in behind the desk. "I didn't want to scare you off." Adrian sat down slowly. "Scare me off with what exactly?" She exhaled. "I own this company and a few others. Finance wasn't the whole story." He leaned back, folding his arms. "So you're not just someone who orders sushi and gets lost in the wrong building." "No," she admitted, "but I wasn't lying about enjoying dinner with you and Gabby. That part was real." He stayed quiet, his gaze flicking to the skyline behind her. "Why bring me here?" "Because I think you're talented," she said. "I saw the woodwork in your hallway. The way you fixed that railing with limited tools. That's skill. My company's expanding into real estate development. We need contractors who care about the details. Adrian blinked. So this is a job offer. A proposal to consider one, she said. You'd work under our project lead, but with flexibility. I know you've got Gabby. We'd adjust your hours to fit. He stared at her, unsure whether to be flattered or suspicious. Is this about dinner? No, she said firmly. This isn't charity. I don't do pity hires. I saw something in you and I want to give you a shot. Something in her tone cut through his skepticism. She wasn't playing a game. This wasn't a setup, but it still felt like he'd stepped into someone else's life. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course. He stood, gripping the back of the chair. I didn't know who you were. I liked that, she said quietly. He hesitated, then opened the door and walked out into the hallway, his pulse still racing. Downstairs, he drove back to the other side of the city, where the potholes were deeper and the buildings sagged under their own weight. At pickup, Gabby ran into his arms, her backpack bouncing behind her. You got the job, she asked, looking up at him. I think so, he said, lifting her onto his hip. But it's not just a job, it's something different. She tilted her head, like a quest. He smiled, yeah, like a quest. That night, after Gabby fell asleep, he sat at the kitchen table, the card Leela had given him resting next to his half-empty coffee mug. He turned it over in his fingers, thinking about the way she'd looked at him not with pity, but with quiet certainty. Across town, in her penthouse that overlooked the river, Leela stood on her balcony, arms wrapped around herself. The city glittered below her, full of everything she had built. But all she could think about was the man who had answered the door in a hoodie, the way his eyes had narrowed when he was confused, and how he'd made her laugh without trying. She didn't know where any of this would lead. But for the first time, she wanted to find out. Adrian adjusted his grip on the power drill and stepped back to study the framework he'd just installed. The new site, an upscale brownstone renovation in the West Village, was nothing like the places he usually worked. No peeling drywall or sagging beams. Everything here was polished, precise, and expensive, judging by the imported marble slabs stacked near the entrance. He wasn't used to working with a crew that wore logoed polos instead of paint-streaked flannels, or taking orders from a project lead who used words like aesthetic cohesion. But he was learning quickly. And more than that, he was working steady hours with good pay and a flexible schedule that let him pick Gabby up before the sun went down. What he wasn't used to, what he couldn't stop thinking about, was the woman who made it all possible. Leela hadn't contacted him since that day in her office. No calls, no unexpected visits, not even a message through Monica. She'd offered him the opportunity, then vanished like mist, and for reasons he couldn't explain, that unsettled him more than he expected. He wiped his hands on a rag and headed for the break area, where his coworker, Jonah, was pouring coffee into a thermos. You're Palmer, right? Jonah asked, glancing over his shoulder. The new guy from the Fairway referral. Adrian nodded. Word is, she saw your work somewhere and personally recommended you. That true? I guess, Adrian said, grabbing a water bottle from the cooler. Jonah gave a low whistle. Man, I've been doing this 20 years. Never even met the lady. You must have made one hell of an impression. Adrian didn't reply. He didn't know what kind of impression he'd made, or if he even wanted to know. Leela Fairway was a name people said with reverence. The kind of woman who didn't just own buildings, she owned the companies that built them. And yet, she'd sat on his couch and shared a plastic fork with his daughter like it was the most natural thing in the world. Later that afternoon, after clocking out, he picked Gabby up from daycare and stopped at the corner market. She clutched a box of juice and chattered about a new story she'd made up involving a dinosaur mare and a flying dog, while he paid for groceries and tried not to think about how quiet his phone had been all week. Back home, Gabby colored at the kitchen table while he made dinner. The apartment smelled like garlic and butter, and for a moment, everything felt normal, comfortable, even. Until there was a knock at the door. Gabby looked up. Is it the fairy again? Adrian dried his hands and opened the door. Leela stood there, holding a white paper bag and looking more uncertain than he'd ever seen her. I know I should have called, she said quickly, but I was, in the neighborhood, sort of. He stepped aside. Come in. She walked in slowly, her eyes scanning the apartment like she was trying to memorize every detail. I brought dessert, she said, offering the bag, from that bakery on Delancey. Remember Gabby said she liked sprinkles. Thanks, he said, taking it. Gabby jumped up from her seat. You came back. Leela crouched down. I did. I missed you and your stories. Gabby beamed and pulled her back to the table without hesitation. Leela let herself be guided, looking completely out of place on the mismatched chair with her tailored coat and silk blouse, but she didn't seem to care. Adrian returned to the stove, stirring the sauce and trying not to stare. You didn't have to come all this way, he said over his shoulder. I know, she replied, but I wanted to. He plated the food and joined them, sliding a plate in front of her. She gave him a grateful look, and for a while, they ate in companionable silence, listening to Gabby narrate her latest drawing. When Gabby finally wandered off to her room to find her stuffed triceratops, Leela reached for her water glass. I didn't mean to disappear after the job offer, she said. I wanted to give you space. I didn't want you to think I was interfering. You weren't. She met his gaze. I wasn't sure where the line was, between helping and overstepping. He leaned back. You weren't overstepping, just surprising. I get that a lot, she said softly. You don't have to keep doing that. She tilted her head. Doing what? Acting like I'm going to change my mind about you because of what you do, or what you have. Her face changed just slightly. That's not what I'm worried about. Then what are you worried about? She hesitated. That I'm not cut out for this, for any of this. He didn't ask what she meant. He could see it in the way her hands curled around the glass, the way her shoulders stayed just a little too rigid even when she smiled. You sat on the floor with Gabby and colored a dragon for an hour, he said. You're more cut out for this than half the people I know. She gave a soft laugh, almost disbelieving. You really think that? He nodded. Yeah, I do. She looked at him for a long moment, like she was weighing something. Then she reached into her coat pocket and slid a small envelope across the table. He frowned. What's this? An invitation, she said. I'm hosting a benefit gala in a few days. It's for a foundation my family started education programs for underserved schools. I'd like you to come, both of you. His eyebrows rose. That's not really my scene. I don't need you to impress anyone, she said. I just want you there. He stared at the envelope, then at her. You sure you want me in your world? I think you're already in it, she said quietly. Gabby returned, triceratops in hand, and climbed into Leela's lap without asking. Leela wrapped an arm around her like it was natural. Adrian watched them, something tightening in his chest. Maybe she hadn't just walked into their lives. Maybe she was meant to stay. Gabby's tiny fingers curled tighter around Adrian's as they stepped into the ballroom, her wide eyes darting toward the chandeliers above them like she was afraid they might fall from the ceiling. This place is shinier than a treasure chest, she whispered. He squeezed her hand. Just don't touch anything that sparkles. The gala was already in motion. Servers in crisp black vests maneuvered between guests holding fluted glasses and murmuring in low, practiced voices. A string quartet played near the far wall, their music drifting through the air like it belonged to another world entirely. Adrian adjusted the cuffs of his only suit, which he'd rented that morning, and checked the neckline of Gabby's navy dress. He'd ironed it himself, careful with every pleat, but she still tugged at the sash like it was trying to choke her. "Can we find Noodle Fairy now?" she asked. He scanned the crowd, then caught sight of her before he could answer. Leela stood near the center of the room, surrounded by a small circle of polished executives. Her gown was deep violet, tailored to perfection, her hair swept into a soft twist that made her look almost unreal. But when she saw them, the conversations around her faded into background noise. Her entire expression changed. She broke away from the group without hesitation. "You made it," she said, stopping in front of them. Gabby grinned. "We got lost twice, but Dad said maps are just suggestions." Leela laughed, then knelt down. "You look like a star tonight." Gabby leaned closer and whispered, "My shoes are itchy." Leela touched her shoulder. "We'll fix that later. I've got cupcakes hidden in the kitchen if you survive dinner." Gabby lit up like a firefly and ran off toward the dessert table, where a staff member immediately stepped in to help. Adrian watched her go, then turned back to Leela. "You didn't have to do all this for her." "I didn't," she said. "I did it because I wanted to." They stood in silence for a beat, the hum of soft jazz and clinking glass filling the space between them. "You clean up well," she added, her voice quieter now. "I'm still wearing my work boots," he said. "I noticed," she replied, eyes flicking down. "They fit you." He glanced around the room at the men in tailored tuxedos and the women draped in silk like it was stitched onto their skin. Everything here screamed permanence, wealth, legacy. And yet somehow, she looked like she belonged with him more than she did with any of them. "You're not like the people here," he said suddenly. Leela's brows rose slightly. Should I be offended? "No," he said. "It's a compliment. You don't wear this like armor." "I used to," she said, "but lately it feels more like a costume." He studied her for a moment. "Then what's real?" She didn't hesitate. "Gabby's stories, you're quiet, dinner on a couch, that's real." Before he could respond, a voice cut in from behind them. "There you are, darling." A tall man in a charcoal suit approached, his smile too polished, his eyes glittering with something colder than curiosity. Adrian instinctively stepped closer to Leela. "Adrian, this is Devin," she said evenly. "He's an investor." Devin extended a hand. "So you're the one who's been keeping Leela distracted." "She's the one who offered me work," Adrian replied, shaking it briefly. "Generous, isn't she?" Devin turned to Leela. "We should talk numbers before the board dinner next week." "Not tonight," she said, her tone sharp. He gave a mock bow. Of course, wouldn't want to interfere. When he walked away, Adrian turned to her. "Friend of yours?" "Hardly," she muttered. "He's a reminder." "Of what?" "Everything, don't want any more." She looked up at him, her eyes suddenly vulnerable in a way that shattered the distance the room had put between them. "I've spent years building this life," she said, "and I don't regret it, but I don't want to spend the rest of it with people who use words like leverage when they talk about loyalty." Adrian searched her face. "What do you want?" Her answer was immediate. Something quiet, something honest, something that doesn't care about glass ceilings or balance sheets. He stepped closer. "You sure you're ready for that?" She smiled, not a perfect, poised smile, but one that reached the edges of her eyes. "I think I already chose it." A few feet away, Gabby waved at them with a sprinkle-covered cupcake in each hand. Adrian waved back, then turned to Leela. "You want honest?" he asked. "I don't know how to do this. I've never been with someone who owns more than one set of matching wine glasses." "That's okay," she said. I've never been with someone who makes me forget I have a phone. He reached for her hand. Lacing their fingers together like it was the easiest thing in the world. Then maybe we figure it out together. She leaned in, eyes locked on his. Starting now. He looked down at the little girl who had somehow become the compass for both of them, then back at the woman who saw through every wall he'd ever tried to build. Yeah, he said, now sounds good. Later that night, after the gala wound down and the last of the guests disappeared into sleek town cars, Leela stood in the quiet of her rooftop terrace with Adrian beside her and Gabby asleep on a nearby lounge chair, wrapped in a borrowed coat. The skyline stretched out before them, glittering and endless, but it was the warmth of his hand in hers that made her feel like she finally had something solid. I used to think love was a business deal, she said. Now I know it just feels like home. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, then welcome home. And as the wind tugged gently at the hem of her gown, and Gabby murmured something about dinosaurs in her sleep, Leela turned her face toward the future and smiled. Because this wasn't about sacrifice, this wasn't about compromise. It was about choosing someone who saw all of you and still stayed. The first time Adrian stepped into Leela's townhouse, he paused in the foyer, taking in the quiet elegance with a brow slightly raised. Gabby skipped ahead, already slipping her shoes off and admiring the stained glass window at the bend of the staircase like she was walking into a castle. You live here, Adrian said, his voice low as his eyes scanned the coffered ceiling and the black and white tile beneath his boots. Leela unfastened her coat, hanging it beside his on the antique brass hook. For the last 2 years, it's the quietest place I've ever lived. Quiet, he said, glancing toward the grand piano in the corner. This place could host a symphony. She smiled gently. It used to. My parents held fundraisers here before they moved out of the city. Now it's just me and the echo. Gabby's voice rang from the top of the stairs. There's a whole other floor up here. Leela called up, that's the library. I've got a beanbag chair with your name on it. Adrian looked at her, one brow lifted. You keeping that just in case a 4-year-old wandered in? I kept it because I never knew when I'd need someone to remind me to breathe, she said, then added, you both do that. He reached for her hand and gave it a quiet squeeze. We're not temporary, Leela. She nodded, something settling behind her eyes. I know. Later that week, she cleared her schedule and invited them both to stay for the weekend. What started as a spontaneous sleepover turned into mornings filled with pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, afternoons in the garden where Gabby tried to count butterflies, and evenings curled together on the oversized couch watching old adventure movies. Adrian helped with repairs around the house, things Leela hadn't even noticed were off until he fixed them. A loose cabinet hinge, a dripping faucet in the guest bathroom, a stubborn window latch. He moved through her space so naturally that by Sunday, it felt less like she was hosting someone and more like something had finally clicked into place. After dinner, while Gabby helped one of Leela's house staff wash dishes, Adrian stepped onto the back terrace where Leela stood by the railing, sipping tea. The breeze tugged at the hem of her cardigan, her hair falling free from its usual updo. He walked up behind her. You ever stop moving? She glanced over her shoulder. Only when I'm with you. He leaned beside her. I've been thinking about something. Should I be concerned? No, he said, looking out at the garden. But I don't want to go back, not to the way things were before. She turned to face him fully. You mean the apartment? I mean the distance, the guessing, the waiting for the right moment. I want you with me. I want Gabby to grow up knowing that love isn't something that visits, it's something that stays. Leela's expression softened. I was afraid I'd be too much. That this, she gestured to the house behind them, would make you feel like you didn't belong. I don't want to belong to walls, he said. I want to belong to you. She reached up, touching the side of his face. Then you already do. A week later, Leela made a quiet announcement at a board dinner that she'd be stepping back from day-to-day operations. Not retiring, just shifting. She wanted to be more present, for herself, for the people who mattered. The headlines that followed were riddled with speculation, but she didn't care. She'd spent enough years chasing legacy. Now she was carving out a life. Adrian took on a new role within the company's real estate branch, one with creative authority. He designed community spaces, repurposing old buildings into functional homes for families who reminded him of who he used to be. He worked hard, but he came home on time. Dinner was never missed, and bedtime stories were sacred. Leela and Gabby grew inseparable. They had tea parties in the greenhouse and built forts in the living room. Gabby started calling her Leela Bean, a nickname born out of a spilled cup of cocoa on the library rug. Leela wore the title with pride. One afternoon, a few months later, they were in the garden again. Gabby was twirling in a yellow sundress, chasing bubbles, while Leela sat on a blanket, sketching ideas for a children's reading center. Adrian joined her, handing her a glass of lemonade. He waited until Gabby was chasing a butterfly near the fence, before pulling something small and velvet from his pocket. Leela looked down, eyes widening. Adrian. He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a single diamond nestled in the center. I didn't want a crowd. I didn't want a stage. I just wanted this. You, her, us. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes filling before she could speak. I know we already belong to each other, he said, but I want to make it official. I want to marry you, Leela. She dropped her sketchbook, leaned forward, and kissed him with a kind of certainty that left no room for questions. Yes, she whispered against his lips. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Gabby ran over, dropping to her knees beside them. Did I miss something? Did someone win? Leela laughed through her tears, pulling her close. We all did, baby. The wedding was held in the garden 2 months later, under a canopy of fairy lights and soft music. There were no press releases, no society columns. Just friends, family, and the kind of love that didn't need to be announced to be real. Gabby wore a flower crown and walked Leela down the aisle. Adrian waited with his hand over his heart, eyes never leaving the two girls who had changed his life. And when they said their vows, it wasn't about promises made in front of others, it was about everything they'd already lived. The quiet nights, the laughter, the way they'd found each other across a city full of strangers. They didn't need a mansion or a fairy tale to feel rich. They had each other. And that was more than enough.